Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we are bringing on Mr. Performance himself, Tim Kadlec. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Jason?
I'm doing well. As that came out of my mouth, I immediately regretted it. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I appreciate being put on the spot like that. It's good.
No, so I am super excited to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a long time. I've seen you speak at conferences like Perf Matters, and I've seen your work around the web. But for those of us who are not familiar with your work, do you want to give us a little bit of a background?
Yeah, sure. So like Jason said, my name's Tim Kadlec. I live in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, which is why I think I started getting into the performance in the first place. I think we tend to be 5-10 years behind everybody else when it comes to, mobile connectivity and all that stuff. So I think I probably just got bored with things being so slow and that's how it all kind of started. But I've been doing performance for now for like, I don't know, 10, 12 years, I guess I've been focusing on it. Some of that was starting off was at an agency, did that in-house for a publisher. And then probably the bulk of that time was working for myself as a performance consultant, helping organizations, do things like this, like audit and find where we can make improvements, as well as strategic, how do we build up a culture of performance in the organization? And then now, as of last December, joined Catchpoint to work on web page test full time.
Nice.
So
nice.
That's been awesome.
Yeah, and web page test, for those of y'all who have not seen it, is an invaluable tool. I use it all the time. It's a huge resource in my tool belt. But what I will admit is I don't actually understand a lot of what's happening on web page test. So I go for the high level stuff, right? Sure. Like I tend to look at like, oh, that bar is really long. That's probably a problem. I should dig into that. But I've never been one to have a strong grasp on flame charts or really being able to dig into the depths of those reports, which is one of the things that I think is maybe true for a lot of devs. I've talked to a lot of folks who feel pretty intimidated by anything but the console in dev tools. Hey, what's up, Ben? Ben and friends. I hope y'all had a good stream. Welcome. We're talking about performance today with Tim Kadlec. But so, like, I guess, is that something that you run into a lot, where people like they want to, but they're kind of intimidated by the even where to start?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've long felt that like performance sits. I think Paul Lewis called them the boring pillars of the web, right? Like performance, accessibility, and security. They all kind of sit in that little area, right, where they're really, really important, and not necessarily the thing though that you get to focus full time on as a developer, right? Like most engineers, you're tasked with like building the next feature out, and you happen to also have to make that feature accessible and secure and performant and everything else that goes into building well. And so developing some level of expertise to be able to jump through that stuff right away, that's tough. Like, and it's also not, I don't think, a very fair expectation for engineers or developers to all have that level of depth and understanding. So I think like the goal is to like get at least an awareness, and honestly, like just being aware that like performance is something you need to factor into your work is such a great starting point. And that's why, like it's pretty typical for folks to, maybe they can run a lighthouse audit, but they're not entirely sure what to do with some of the recommendations, right, or maybe they can do a little bit here or a little bit there. They're just not sure how to, take it to that next step. I think that's where most people sit.
I think
don't
so.
get to sit with these tools open every day.
Well, and kind of what you're talking about here with accessibility and performance and security being the as you put it, the boring pillars of the web. I feel like that really taps into something just fundamentally human, right? It's like being told to eat your vegetables. Like, very rarely do people want to sit down and eat a whole plate full of vegetables, but we also know that if we don't do it, we end up getting like scurvy. Right. So it's like, we know we need it to survive. We know that it's critical for, you feel better, things work better. Like it's definitely the sort of thing where when someone has spent the time on accessibility, when someone has spent the time on performance, and when you have that level of trust that the security is there, apps feel better. Like when you use an app that is really fast, when you use an app that has all the right keyboard navigation pieces and all the things actually fit together the way they should to be accessible, it feels amazing. You're like, dang, this app is rock solid. Like, what a great app. And it's hard to know why, but it's that subtle stuff. Like, oh, it didn't take 500 milliseconds to see the next screen. It just, boom, it was there, right? And
you definitely nailed something there, right? Like there are those fundamental pieces of the user experience, but like to your point, like, you know, you don't notice it until something's wrong. Like if it's, and even then, like if it's working well when you load it, like you're not exactly able to say like, oh, it's just, this is because they optimize performance or whatever. It just seems to be working well and you can't maybe point your finger at it. But the other thing is like, we miss a lot of this stuff if we're not proactively looking for it. Like from the accessibility perspective, right? Like if I never try to navigate by a keyboard only, if I never use a screen reader, I have no idea that stuff's there, right? Like it's not something I encounter on a day-to-day basis. From a performance perspective, it's the same. If I am using a latest M1 MacBook and, you know, a souped up, the iPhone Pro X, whatever it is called, you know, if those are my primary devices that I'm using, they're so powerful. They're going to skip over all of my JavaScript issues. And if I'm coming on, you know, I pay out the wazoo for like a ridiculous monthly like connection because I need that for my work and it makes me better at what I do. But it also means that like if there's network related issues, I'm not going to see that unless I'm actively finding ways to expose those. They're those things that like they just don't jump out at you unless you're looking for them.
Absolutely.
Or you're in a situation where, you know, that's your reality. You're in a situation where your connectivity isn't as great or your device isn't souped up. It's like a regular normal device that most folks would buy at the store. Like then you start running into those problems.
Yes. Yeah. And I think to, you know, thinking about where do you actually run into those problems, right? Because I think, unfortunately, you'll hear people make the argument, well, our users are all on iPhone. Our users are all in, you know, the US and have good connections. And so there's this sense of like, well, the technology problems exist somewhere else and not here, and it's not for our audience. But that's, in my experience at least, that is very much not the case. Like, go ahead.
Accessibility calls that, like in the accessibility industry, they've got a term, is this situational accessibility or something like that?
Situational disability, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, right. So this idea that like you're not necessarily permanently in this bucket or this category, right? Like you're dipping in and out of it in different situations, or like, you know, you break your arm and suddenly, you know, you have to interact with a page in a different way, that kind of a thing. It's the same with performance. Like, you know, I just did it in my explanation. Like when we do like the short, like, you know, brief sound snippets and stuff, it makes it sound like people forever live in one bucket or another.
Right.
But the reality is that all of us are going to be in those situations where at some point, you know, we hit a situation where the network is lagging for whatever reason. It's overtaxed, or we're just on a poor connection. You know, maybe we're at Starbucks or something, or where our device, you know, slows down because it's being weighted down by a bunch of other stuff going on, or background processes or whatever. Like all of us are going to be in that situation at some point or another. And in fact, I think most of us, if we think hard enough, can probably remember a situation or two where we were like, oh my gosh, this is painfully slow.
Well, I mean, I think about it. I'm in those situations constantly. Like I have the latest iPhone, but I walk outside of my house and there's an area in my neighborhood that just has bad cell reception. So if I need to look something up, I will wait a full minute to load a website, unless I hit one that's really optimized. And you know, if I go to a restaurant, all the restaurants have QR codes for their menus now. If I don't have a strong signal or their Wi-Fi network is overloaded, it takes me forever to look at their menu. Each click is like 7 or 8 seconds to get between pages, and it's like, man, it's just text. Like I'm trying to buy a sandwich here. And so I think there has never been a point in my life where I am always on a high-speed connection, where I'm always using the latest and greatest. Like you always feel those perf issues, but we can just rationalize it. Oh, well, whatever, I'm on a mobile network. But truly, my folks lived out in Montana for years, and they lived in Eastern Washington by a river where their only data connection was like through a tethered cell phone. And so, you know, their whole experience is if it can't stream over 3G, like that thing's not happening.
Yeah.
And these are people who, like, my dad works in tech. He's a C programmer specifically because he can get stuff to move over the net. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I don't need very much data for that.
No, that's, yeah. And Ryan, I think in the chat there, Ryan mentioned something about asking if web performance is directly proportional to the probability of these other factors. I think you're not far off in terms of like at least the importance of performance for any given thing. Like it's about resiliency and reach, right? Like you're sort of, by making your site or your application faster, lighter weight, you are making it more resilient to less than ideal situations, which means that if you are going to hit those factors in real life, or your users are, the more resilient and the faster you've made your site, the better it's going to perform, the more usable it's going to be.
Right.
And certainly, yeah, if you're targeting, it's different for different folks, right? Like I think the example everybody always throws out when it comes to perf is Apple, right? Like Apple, when they announce a new MacBook or a new iPhone, if you ever looked at their product pages, they're like 80 megs. They're ridiculous. They're huge.
Absurd, yeah.
They can, yeah, right. But they can also kind of get away with it maybe because, Apple tends to go after a pretty highly affluent, technical savvy audience that tends to have a lot of purchasing power, tends to be coming in on those powerful devices and networks anyway. And so reaching that audience means that, maybe it's not quite as important to them as, say, a Walmart, right? Who's trying to reach everybody like at sort of this mass population scale. They're going to have a much more diverse audience in terms of the network and the devices and things like that. Now, that being said, I suspect Apple would still see benefits from making that product page lightweight, smaller, more performant. I don't think I've ever come across somebody who doesn't see at least some benefit from doing that. But it does mean that, like, looking at the probability of their users hitting those different factors, it's a little less important for them than, say, Walmart or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and so this is the sort of thing that you bring up the business impact, right? And so you worked as a consultant for years and years, and so you've seen this firsthand, like, over and over again. So in your experience, like, how big is the impact? You read these banner studies. There's the big ones, like Google always says, hey, if you cut off a half second, you drop your bounce rate by whatever percent. These kind of big figures, or Amazon's, like, for every 100 milliseconds, you add this many percents of conversion. But we're not Google, we're not Amazon. So what does it mean for a average size business, like somebody who's big but not like not FAANG?
Well, so first off, if you're, like, just as a shameless thing, like, Tammy Everts and I maintain a site called WPOstats.com. So it is literally just, I think Nullify hosted, a site that just kind of shows off highlights of different business case studies around performance and links off to whatever source that happens to be, whether it's blog post or video or something like that. So, that's good for sort of getting those sort of anecdotes, and seeing sort of the statistics from that perspective, if you want to just kind of see how that's all working. As far as for actual impact, predicting actual business impact is always going to be tricky. In fact, measuring the impact is tricky for folks. It's not always the easiest thing to draw a line between your business metrics and your performance impacts and improvement. And certainly you can't. I have seen folks say, like, in fact, there are tools built around the premise that, Walmart and Amazon both in different times saw for every 100 milliseconds, they got a 1% increase in conversion. And so there are tools that kind of use that as sort of an estimate for, like, what are my conversion benefits going to be? That's not super, it's okay for, like, a rough estimate of, like, a potential thing, I guess, to kind of get you in a ballpark. But if you go in and expect that, like, this tool told me I'm going to make $200,000 more by shaving 100 milliseconds, don't be surprised if you don't. Like, if it's very, very different, right? I do think, like, part of this is making sure that as an organization, you have real user performance data. So data that's recording real user traffic and real user performance, so you can connect that to those business metrics and see how they relate. And then part of that is, go ahead. When
you're talking about that with the real user data, that when you hear people talk about, like, RUM data, is that what you're referencing? Because I see that kind of thrown around. And can you maybe take a second to explain what that means?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's two primary forms of like performance monitoring. We have real user monitoring, which is the RUM data. That's collecting performance data from real user sessions, which means what's happening is you're putting like some JavaScript on your page. That page is recording on every page load these key performance metrics and then beaconing them back somewhere. Usually it's a service, catch point, speed curve, impulse, that's doing that, or you've rolled your own, but it's collecting those data on the fly for every single page load session for every page that you have this script on. The other kind of measuring that you have is synthetic. Synthetic is lab metrics. So synthetic is me saying, okay, I'm going to run a test against these pages, and I'm going to run the test from this location on this hardware or emulated hardware over this kind of a network, and I'm going to record everything that happens. So they both play very, like, I guess what I think it was Harry Roberts broke it down as sort of proactive and passive monitoring, which I kind of like the way of thinking about that. Like RUM is sort of passive. You put the script in, you just sit back and collect everything. Synthetic is very proactive. Like you have to choose, these are the pages I'm going to test, and I have to trigger those tests and make them run. The RUM data is important because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Like if your real user data is showing that you have performance problems, you have performance problems. It doesn't matter what tests you're running elsewhere. If people are hitting problems, there is something wrong going on. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the synthetic data is, you can get very, very detailed. You can record the entire browser session. So from that perspective, it's helpful to be able to dive deep. And it's also a better consistent baseline or benchmark. RUM is going to be noisy because if you think about it, you've got 1,000 users, that's 150 different situations they're all browsing from. The data is going to be all over the place. Mm-hmm. Synthetic data, because I control all the variables, I can get a nice consistent comparison. So if I'm testing on deploy, or if I just want to experiment with optimizations and see how they're impacting my site, synthetic data is going to be a lot easier to do that.
For sure. Yeah. Well, that's super helpful. I also found an article that came from Catchpoint about RUM versus synthetic monitoring, which I threw into the chat, and it'll be in the show notes. So with that, I mean, I feel like I could ask you 10 million questions about this, and it would all be very kind of abstract and philosophical, but I'd really like to see this in practice. So if you don't mind, I'm going to switch us over and let's do let's just start picking a site apart. I will probably pick on me. So let me get over here.
Put you right under the microscope, man.
I'm ready. Okay, so before we start that, let's do a quick shout out. We're going to give a shout out to Rachel from White Coat Captioning, who is here with us today doing live captioning, so the show is more accessible. Make sure you go to the homepage to check that out. That's where you can follow those captions. That's made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, Fauna, Auth0, and Hasura, all kicking in to make the show more accessible to more people, which means a whole lot to me. And while you're clicking on things on the internet, make sure you go and follow Tim. Nonstop information, a very, very helpful account to be following. Okay, so I think I'm ready. So we have a couple sites that we can check. Like we can pick apart the Learn with Jason site. I've also got my personal site here. And now both of these are relatively small and they're not like ad driven or anything like that. So it also might be kind of fun to pick on some of those like very ad heavy sites to start to look at how third-party scripts and things weigh in. But I'll let you take the lead here. So if we want to start digging into this, what's the where do you want to, like, which site do you want to start with, and what would our first step be?
Well, let's start with one of yours. If we can, maybe we can get to something that's got a little bit, more complexity in ads and stuff like that, so we can kind of show some of the impact there. But might be fun just to, at least get our bearings on something like yours. So which one do you want us to pick on? We'll be nice. We'll be kind, Jason. I'll be gentle.
Let's pick on this one. I feel like this one's probably more likely to have issues.
Okay. All right. Cool. So The first thing, like if I was doing this, like actual, like if you had hired and it was like a formal audit and stuff, the first thing I'd be asking, I guess, is about like the traffic itself.
Mhm.
You want to start by like focusing on a page or a couple pages that are going to be the most important from a traffic perspective. And the other thing, so that's part of the thing to factor in here is like not necessarily just the homepage, but like maybe it's an episode page or a schedule or whatever. And the other thing is mobile versus desktop. Like if we were going to focus our energy, do you happen to know if it would be desktop users here or mobile would be the primary audience?
Let's go and look at the data because I'm not 100% sure. So if I go into this and then we look at analytics, then we can see where's everybody breaking down from.
Right.
So here's kind of the country breakdown.
Okay, so US dominant, yeah.
Yep. And this, when you write a blog and you think that you're just taking a note for yourself and then it ends up being the most popular content on your
Nice.
But so it's like individual pages. So this is like an episode page. These are all episode pages. So it looks like the homepage, the schedule, and then independent episode pages. So and
that's pretty typical. Like you're not like, like an e-com site, for example, I'd be expecting a lot of PDP pages, like product display pages. But you wouldn't necessarily have to test all of them. You just find like it's a page type, right? And then you find one that's a fairly representative page type and start there maybe.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we've got like, this is our page type, and it looks like I don't have any breakdown between like device type. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have any analytics installed on my site. So I just kind of have the rough.
Hey, I respect that. That's cool. That keeps it nice and light. Okay. Well, we can kind of do both. Okay. So, we got a lot of boops dropping in here. I dig it.
Cassidy has arrived. Hello, Cassidy. Thank you for the sub.
So when I guess from here, like there's two places we could go to start, or a few different places. There's no shortage. We're going to bury Jason here.
I know it's we have to, we're going to have to work in the top third of the site.
Perfect. So there's no shortage of different performance tools you can go to. Like the recommendation I always give to folks, other than like getting super like worried or upset about the fact that there are so many of them and kind of getting overwhelmed by that, is to pick like one or two. If you get really good at one or two tools that can help you analyze performance, you're going to be in great shape. I would say 90% of the auditing I do sits inside of either Chrome DevTools or Web Page Test.
Okay.
And then Chrome DevTools I tend to use for a lot more like in the moment analysis.
For sure.
Some of the things that you can do in Chrome DevTools to be able to like immediately like save a file and do a local override is super cool, or like play with JavaScript in the flame chart is awesome. So that kind of thing is where Chrome DevTools comes in. For Web Page Test, that's where I usually go for sort of, I want to get the picture of how things are performing, network, what the browser is doing, but also have sort of a stable, consistent comparison point.
Yeah.
Because DevTools is super powerful. Particularly Chrome has done an amazing job. But the reproducibility of results is tough because it's like DevTools on my machine, DevTools on your machine. We've got different powerful machines, different kinds of networks. So I may run a test and see something here, and you may run a test on yours and not be able to reproduce it. Or even if the throttling is applied, like the CPU throttling is based on the actual device that you're on. So that's going to change a little bit. And the network throttling, actually, the way DevTools network throttling works, it sits in between the network layer of the browser and the render layer of the browser, which means that it will like throttle download times, for example, for content, but it will not have any impact on how long does it take to go connect to this URL. Or how long does it take for a redirect to occur? Because that work all happens in the network layer. So even if you're doing like throttling in the browser at sort of a 3G network, those connection speeds are going to look super, super fast in DevTools. So there's reproducibility issues and stuff, which is why I kind of bounce between the two.
Yeah.
So for yours, if you don't mind, like can we grab one of those episode pages and drop the web page test?
Yeah, let's do it. So I'm gonna grab. Let's do this one with Brian. That's got all the features. It's got the full transcript in here and everything. So we'll be able to see, because it's a huge DOM because of that transcript. So let's go to web page test.
I thought that was Boop.
Oh no, I did the wrong one.
Boop, .org. Yeah, we don't have the .com.
Oh god, okay, I'm gonna get
Last
there.
Last time we asked, I think it's a lot. So yeah, I thought that said Boo Performance for a second down there, but it says Boop Performance, I think is how it's supposed to be. So I feel better now.
Boo Performance.
Yeah, it's good. I'll take that. Okay, yeah. So if you drop it in there now, before you run the test, if you could just scroll down a little bit. So there's a ton of different locations. We know it's US, so we can just keep it in Virginia is fine.
Okay.
Chrome is fine. If you don't mind clicking on advanced settings, we'll expand that out a little bit. Okay. So you can see there's a ton of stuff we could change. We'll probably fire off 2 tests. Let's slow the connection down from cable to 4G.
Okay.
The reason I do this is I like the higher latency. It's going to slow things down just a little bit. I like to stress test better. In fact, the more less than ideal the scenario is that we're testing in, the more likely it is that we're going to surface any underlying performance issues. So I love stress testing. So I love to go like a little less powerful on the device if I can,
Gotcha.
A little higher latency on the network, that kind of thing. We can keep it. Let's do first view and repeat view.
Okay.
That's under your number of tests. That'll load the page the first time as a fresh page view, as if nobody had ever come there before. And then it'll refresh the page. So you can see what does it look like for people who are coming back to your site after they've already visited.
So like with a warm cache and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's probably good for now. So if you can do like run a control or a command, what are you on? Enter on the start test to fire that off in the background.
Oh, I hit the wrong button.
Command click or whatever it does to open it a new tab, or you can click and that's fine.
I thought I command clicked. It didn't do the thing I wanted.
If you can get that's all right. Grab another tab with the webpagetest.org or homepage and we'll fire the same test off, but this time let's run it on an Android device.
Okay. So here, like here?
Yeah, no, so you're good for the test location is great. If you go under browser.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, no, if test location is awesome. If we had if you were not US dominant, we could go like India or somewhere, Europe or whatever. But here, let's do the Chrome device emulation for the G4. It's the top Motorola G generation.
Oh, here, 4. Gen 4. Got it.
Yeah. So that's the one that is a good resource for anybody who's kind of curious about, and you can fire this test off so we can get it running. It'll take a second. But a really good resource for anybody who's curious about why that particular device is Alex Russell, formerly of Google, now of Microsoft, wrote a fantastic post around device inequality and network stuff like that, where he did a ridiculous amount of research to identify what is a good median test device and network condition and stuff. It's a highly recommended read, but the G4 is for 2 years running, kind of fits that profile. So what these will do is these will run these tests sort of, in both of these cases, we're running off of an AWS instance. And then, you get results like this. So let's see, this is our desktop one?
Yeah, this is the desktop one. So Chrome, 4G, we ran our 2 tests and let's see. So I like seeing green.
Yeah, the green is good. So that's the core Web Vitals. So if you had problems with any of the Web Vital metrics on this run, we'd flag it as either orange or red to tell you it was needs improvement or bad. So if you on this summary, this metric summary section, see how it says first view run 2?
First view run 2, yeah, here.
Yep. So what this is telling us the second run was the median run for the 2 runs that you ran based on the speed index. So if you click on that, Sia's here. Yeah, so Sia's right. Actually, if your site doesn't have enough heavy traffic to do this, but if it was a bigger site, hopefully we can get a chance to run one of those a little later. we'll actually pull data from Google's Chrome user experience report for that page to
Oh,
let you see like this test result is about in line with your 75th percentile, or it's way too fast, or it's way too slow, like to help you sort of, did I get a realistic test result here?
what's
Um,
the like what's the threshold you have to clear for that to start happening?
so it's got to be inside of the Crux database. I can't remember exactly. I don't even know if they have published exactly like how many sessions,
Oh,
page
okay.
sessions they have to see. They have for different reasons, like security reasons, privacy reasons. If you're below a certain threshold of traffic, they're not going to include all that kind of stuff there. But yeah. Okay. So let's see. Run two. Bless you if that was a sneeze.
It's just yeah. I'm just trying to inhale my coffee over here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. No, that's fine. On all the way to the right there, can you click on the film strip view? That's where I like to start digging in.
Okay.
Okay. So if you scroll, this will give you a visual progression. We're taking screenshots as the page is loading. As you're scrolling back and forth, do you see the little red line all the way to the left there?
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's, yeah, that's right. Okay, if you scroll down a little bit in the page, and we may need to go, yeah, there's a red line on that waterfall as well. So as you move back and forth through the film strip, that red line will shift over the waterfall. So what's nice about this is we can line up
Oh,
with your film strip to the waterfall to see like, all right, like at the point that stuff starts appearing here, what was holding up the, what was the resources up to that point? So
got
actually,
it.
if you scroll up just a hair again, we're going to change one thing on the film strip because I think it's a little nicer. For the thumbnail interval, which is there. Yeah, can you change that to 0.1 seconds? Just so we're a little bit more granular.
Oh,
Okay.
nice. Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so if you get it close to that 1.6 when we start seeing content there. So now if we go down here, we can see anything to the left of that red line. Those are resources that, seem to be potentially in the way of that initial render, or at least loading before that initial render occurs. So if we know, for example, we want to speed up how quickly that first pane happens, we focus on that stuff. We don't worry about anything after.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a few things that look like you said. What did you say earlier about like looking at the length of the bars?
Yeah. So this is the part where I would start looking and say like, all right, here's one that looks like something weird is happening because it starts here and then nothing actually happens until here.
Cool.
So that seems like something that I'd want to fix. And then I'm also looking at like, there's a few things in here that I could probably preload. Like I could try to get the browser to start downloading them before we need them so that this kind of moves in parallel here, even though it's not needed until here.
Mhm.
Some of this I can't do because like I use Toast and Toast just kind of does stuff under the hood and I don't
Sure.
have tight control over it. But it's some of this I feel like I do control, like the fact that all my fonts are here. Like I have font display swap. Should I just like defer those or something that'll let this all happen a little bit faster?
Sure.
Um,
So you're already, I think you're further along than you think you are. At least like that's actually that's a really good starting point. Like you zeroed in on a couple of things right away that jumped out to me as well. So looking at like the length of the bars or something that seems a little off is actually, that's a really solid way of doing it. Like, so for each of these, let's look at the first request, for example, for your HTML. You see those, you've got this sort of color progression and there's a key right above that.
oh, here it
That
is.
teal, yeah, that teal part, that's the time that it takes for the browser to resolve the DNS. So you typed in learn with json.dev, go out, figure what IP address that actually, exists at. The orange bit is establishing the connection. Like that's a three-way handshake now. We've got the IP address, we go out and we kind of send some packets back and forth and connect to the server. Then the purple part, that's SSL negotiation. So that's all warming up that connection.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see it on line 13, which is that Cloudinary image that jumped out to you, that's because we're opening up a connection to a different domain. So we have to go through that same process, figure out how do we connect to res.cloudinary.com, open up that connection before we can start downloading the content.
So does that mean that, so actually, I think you just connected a dot in my head for something that I've seen before, because I've seen the link rel preload and the link rel prefetch, and those ones make sense to me. I know that I'm going to get some content on the next page, so I should preload it. Or I know I'm going to use this in a second, so let's prefetch it. Did I get those in the right order?
No, you flip-flopped them. But that's
Dang it,
preload
I do that every time.
That's okay. That's all right. Preload is for the existing page load. Prefetch is for sort of that next one.
Got it. Okay. But there's other ones that I've seen, but I've never used because I don't know what they mean. So there's one for pre-connect. There's one for, I think there was one for like DNS, something like that.
Yeah.
So looking at this, if I use the link rel, the DNS one, this theoretically would happen up here so that this bar would then move back. Is that right?
Well, so you're on the right track. So pre-connect and prefetch, so DNS prefetch would say, I know I'm going to make a connection to this DNS, this domain. Go ahead and do the DNS resolution as soon as you possibly can. Do it before the browser discovers that resource. With pre-connect, it's basically DNS prefetch on steroids. It just has the teeny tiniest less good browser support. That was not a very well constructed sentence, but whatever. Pre-connect is the exact same use case. We're going to load something from a domain. In this case, though, we're saying go ahead, do the DNS resolution, the TCP connection, and the SSL negotiation. Do all of that as soon as you can without, you don't have to wait until you find a resource.
Got it. So this is this whole section is the pre-connect, but the DNS prefetch would only be this bit here.
Exactly.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
In your case, though, applying it to that resource isn't going to help.
Okay.
If you look at your first request, you see how we've got those blue bars, right? Next to after the SSL negotiation. So each of these bars where there's sort of light color and some shaded stuff, each request type gets a different color. HTML is blue, CSS is green, JavaScript is yellow, orange.
Right.
Fonts are red because when Pat Meenan, who built this, added font support, he did not like web fonts, so he wanted to scare people off with the scary, dangerous colors. So those are red. So when we look at that request thing, what we see is the light part. That's where we've made the request off to the server, but we're not actively downloading content. We're waiting for the server to come back. When we see a dark chunk, that's the server passing stuff back. We're actually downloading content. So if we look at where request 13 kind of lines up with that initial request, you're making that, that connection is happening, that DNS resolution is happening right after that first little bit of HTML comes back.
Oh, so
which means that we can't shift it any earlier. Got
you. Okay. Now, I saw just now when I was looking at the at here. Can you do it with headers? Would this help?
So headers potentially would give you a fractional improvement. Okay. But again, because it's coming back with that first chunk that's coming back from your HTML in this case, it's not, there's just, the headers don't arrive any earlier than that first bit of content does. So if you had a situation where we were seeing, let's pretend that it wasn't finding request 13 until after your second bit of content had downloaded. Mm-hmm. You see that second dark section on request 1 there.
I can see one way down here where we're doing a sentry request at the very end.
Yeah, so that's an example where if we wanted to make that connection earlier, we could open up a pre-connect. That would shift that entire connection process all the way over to the same spot that you see your Cloudinary request opened.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. So Sia in the chat actually just hit on the optimization that I would look at for your images, which is putting it on your own domain, which we don't want to lose Cloudinary here though, right? Because Cloudinary is doing some wicked awesome stuff. You pushing your images up into Cloudinary. Cloudinary's are using their fetch API thing, but basically the parameters.
Yeah, I use it way more heavily on this site, but all of these are the same image with cropping and thumbnail stuff and a bunch of cool things. But I actually with this one, I use Cloudinary to assemble the entire image. So each of these pieces is this is one image, this is another image, this is all like a placeholder, this is text that gets written by Cloudinary. Like I automated the thumbnail generation.
I remember reading an article, which you should drop a link to, the article that you wrote on CSS tricks. I know I pinged you about this recently. It's awesome. I had never realized you could do that with Cloudinary. For me, like the performance nut, I viewed Cloudinary as like, do all my image optimization, right? Compress it, get it to the right thing. But I never thought about the whole like auto generate like videos dynamically from images and stuff like that, like the video cards and all that. It's just bonkers. It was really cool to read.
Yeah, I think this is the one where I talk about the social images specifically. And then I did one on CSS tricks. I don't remember which one.
It was like the Netlify video thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the Cloudinary stuff. So this is also really cool because Cloudinary does the images, but it also lets you like stitch together videos. So if we have like a video like this that's, you know, just kind of like a standard piece of content, oops, then you can go down here and like add a bunch of stuff. This is generated by Cloudinary from a video and a piece of text. And then this is like a interstitial video. And then it'll crossfade. Like, check this out. That transition is actually another video. Yeah, that's and awesome. Then when you get to the end, you can do this. Anyways, Cloudinary's dope. You should go play with it.
It is.
I have absolutely rabbit holed. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's fine. I'm happy to go nuts about Cloudinary too. So I guess the point is we don't want to just self-host these images and completely eliminate all the benefits you're getting from Cloudinary. Sia continues to sort of have really nice segues there. I did write a post on my site about how to use Netlify like to proxy request to Cloudinary through my own domain, so that I don't have that connection cost up front. Oh, so if you go down on this a little bit here, I've got code somewhere. Yeah, so right there in the Netlify TOML file, basically proxying there. Phil Hawksworth was the first person I saw kind of tweet out something about this. And then so I decided to sort of, write up about it for my own purposes. You could also do this with, I don't have access to them yet, but Netlify's edge handlers seem like a really good use case for this too, right? Like the edge handlers are, right, it's edge computing, right? Like basically like.
Very cool. They're like little functions that you can run as part of the request. So you can do really, really interesting things with them. Soon, they're early access now, but soon we'll be able to do more like public content because people will be able to actually try them. But yeah. For now, so they're still invite only and very very early access.
I expect, as long as my understanding of them isn't off, I expect them to work similarly to like Cloudflare Workers or Fastly's Edge Compute, right?
Yeah.
To have be able to manipulate the response from a request or a request itself, like on the edge, on Netlify's edge servers before it gets passed down. That would be another really good place to do that. Either with the TOML or the handler, you could proxy your requests to Cloudinary through your own domain and get rid of that connection cost.
So one of the first things I did with edge handlers was I recreated this experiment by Jake Archibald where he replaced every instance of the word cloud with the word but, and it was extremely fun. So let's drop that on in there.
Awesome. No, that's a good handy one. That's useful. Yeah.
I mean, streams in general are very cool, very head bendy, probably worth a whole episode focusing on how they work, sure. But they enable some really cool stuff, and edge handlers will allow you to do stream-based processing of web pages. So in-place modification, and you can detect where somebody's coming from and localize, or detect which cohort somebody's part of and personalize. There's really, really fascinating stuff you can do. But that's not what we're talking about today.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so like the edge handlers or the Netlify TOML approach that I had there, either one of them, what that does is then you're still using Cloudinary behind the scenes, right? Like it's still going to Cloudinary, you're still getting the benefits of the auto optimization and all that jazz. But now the way the browser sees it is it sees it as a request to your domain. That means that connection cost is not occurring in the browser. It's occurring from Netlify's servers to edge servers to Cloudinary, which in most cases is going to be significantly faster.
Right.
So this is one of those things where like the benefit of it is going to be more substantial for folks on those slower networks because they won't have to pay that cost. Whereas, if you're already on a super souped up connection, you're probably not going to see much of an improvement doing this kind of a thing.
But, this is a solid half second here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you click on that, actually, click on the go ahead.
I didn't realize things were clickable. Oh, this is cool.
Yeah,
okay.
No, this is the thing with web page tests. It's like there's a lot of stuff hidden. We have to find better ways to surface. But if you look here, you see the DNS lookup time, initial connection time, and SSL negotiation time listed here. So that's what, 340, 400, 500. Yeah, you're right. 520, 500, a little over half a millisecond. So that image then gets down, goes from 718 milliseconds for the image to arrive and be able to be displayed down to 500 or 200 in this case.
Yeah. I mean, that improvement would be notable, right? Because if you look up here, this is what we're seeing. This is where we start downloading the image, and this is where we actually get it. And so it eliminates that need. We would get at least a couple hundred milliseconds back of, and going from 2 seconds to 1.5 seconds feels pretty snappy in terms of your perception. I feel like if something loads in a second, it feels native. Like that. Yeah. That's my perception of it. It's like, holy crap, that was so fast.
I think there's been experiments that back that up too, is that threshold there. And I mean, again, just to sort of set the expectations, your site's already doing really well, right? Like, it's not like you have terrible performance issues, but we are talking like, shaving off another 300-400 milliseconds on display goes from like that difference of like, hey, this site is fast to like, this site is just snapping, right? Like blazing. So that's one thing that jumps out. Another thing that I would look at here is so the fonts being so high is probably because you're preloading them, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, they're in the style sheet, which it looks like is the first resource that comes in.
But they're requested before the style sheet is ever discovered. So that tells me, because typically the way that works is...
What did I do?
I'm guessing you're preloading.
Let's see. So yeah, I've got some preloads in here. Let me open this in DevTools instead so that it's parsed.
Yeah. Nice. Pretty.
So we're doing meta stuff. That's all the social media. Rel preload. So yeah, we're preloading all the fonts. And then, I do pre-connect the Cloudinary and it doesn't do anything because you just explained why.
It finds it right away anyway.
Yeah.
It's not hurting you for what it's worth. Like, it's not going to like pre-connect somewhere and then reconnect elsewhere, but it's also not providing much there. Okay. So yeah, right. And there's your style sheet kind of at the end there, right before the no script, right? Yeah. So with the style sheet, the way the browser is going to work normally is it's going to download the HTML, download the CSS, do any JavaScript work, parse, like create the DOM, create what it's going to render onto the page. And at that point, it says, oh, now I need a font. I'm going to go request it. So the fonts usually are going to come after. Yours are up front because of the preload, which is one of those things that like, it was for the longest time, like especially when preload first came out, this is what everybody was saying to do with preload. In reality, we sort of found out that might not be the right approach in many cases. Okay. Because what happens is it's sort of, as Sia says, foot gun, it kind of is. Whenever you choose preload, you're immediately promoting that preloaded resource basically to the top of the queue and saying, this is more important than the other things. So by definition, you're pushing those other things out. So you can see, like, for example, your CSS, we need your CSS to display the page. But the browser is spending time and bandwidth downloading those fonts instead of the CSS up front.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's actually pushing out the request, or the download, I should say, of that CSS until after.
Somewhere in here is all my preload stuff. Okay, so what you're saying is with this here, we actually don't want, I'm just going to take a note. So don't preload fonts.
You're going to hate this answer. The answer is maybe.
Maybe.
The answer is maybe. Preload is one of those things that sometimes it can be beneficial and sometimes it can hurt you. This is one of those great ones for testing.
Okay.
Like try a version of the page without the preloads in place and see what happens to a couple things. You're going to want to watch like when that first paint occurs. And I think it was Barry in there who was expressing his disdain at removing all the preloads, which is not wrong. The idea that like by not preloading, you're also kind of ensuring that, you know, depending on your font display settings, you may get that fallback font first and then sort of snaps in the other font after the font arrives. So there's definitely a little bit of balance. It might not be gut all the preloads. Maybe it is like preload 1 or 2 versions of the font.
So like look at whichever font this is, for example, that's going to be the most notable one that pops in. So maybe we only preload this one, and the other ones can swap when they get in.
Exactly. That one's going to be a very prominent like thing. And if your fallback isn't very close, it might be too disruptive to kind of have that completely gut out. So exactly. That's a great way of looking at it. You know, and so then that gets still a few of those files out of the way of the CSS, which is nice. The other thing that we can look at, we've got another thing we can look at of the CSS for an opportunity here too, that may end up offloading a lot of the font stuff entirely.
Got it. Okay. So I'm just going to toss that in as a thing we should look at, and then we'll go back here and let's, you said in the CSS?
Yes. Yeah. So the CSS itself, if you can click on that once. Okay. So this is pretty small. Your CSS is neat and tidy, Jason. Is this the CSS that you use all the way across the site?
I think so. I've very purposefully stripped this site pretty down to make it small because otherwise I have to maintain it.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. All right, so we're talking about a couple K. Okay, if you could close that one and then click on your HTML request. How big is your HTML request?
It's pretty big, I think.
27. Okay. All right. Okay. You know, I've seen much worse. You know, a lot of the stuff that like injects like state as those JSON objects, those things balloon like bonkers, right? 27K is not that bad. I think the other thing you could look at here then is inlining
this is the one
CSS.
that's big. Oh, this is just not that big of a page. So this is the state data, and so that's another like 45K. But so sorry, let me go back to the HTML.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to say since the CSS is what 3K, it was pretty tiny. It's not going to add much to the HTML in size in terms of like forcing another entire round trip back to the server or anything funky like that. And since it's so tiny, you don't even have to try to, you know, have you ever heard of the critical CSS optimization, right? Which is like pull out the subset of CSS for the content above the viewport, inject that inline in the page. You don't even need to go that fancy. Since your CSS is just 3K, I think you could probably safely just inline that CSS in the page. And then what's going to happen is the browser doesn't have to make another request for your CSS at all. So as soon as that last bit of HTML arrives, it should be able to display the page pretty much immediately, as long as there's no blocking JavaScript in the way.
And theoretically, then that means that this would all kind of scooch back this way a little bit because it would start showing. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So if you go down a little bit, like below the waterfall here,
I'm just going to try inlining CSS. I'm going to link to all of these issues. I'll like label them or something so that we can look at the issues. Because the CSS is small, we might be able to inline for more perf.
Is this 11, by the way?
It's called Toast. It's Chris Biscardi's like Preact and Snowpack based kind of pre-rendering. It's all like ESM, which is wonderful. But you definitely feel the pain of like the ESM ecosystem not having fully it hasn't reached critical adoption yet. So half the time you pull something in and you're like, oh great, it doesn't work with ESM yet. living life on the edge. I dig it. That's okay.
Yeah, I haven't actually played with that before.
It's
I'm a big fan of. I really like Preact. Like I'm a big fan of Preact. It's just like that whole philosophy. Like let's see what we can do to sort of still enable that kind of code syntax, but do it in a way that actually prioritizes, the user experience by having as small a JavaScript bundle as possible. I love that. It makes me happy.
I have one of my bucket list guests is to get Jason Miller to come on and teach us Preact and just kind of talk about the philosophy behind it, because it's just such a cool project. Like I love the API compatibility with 10% of the size, if that.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's a really, really cool setup.
In my dream world, that's what like everybody would start with, and then only reach for React if they had to. Like,
agreed.
Yeah, that would be awesome. By the way, if you hadn't seen it, Etsy did a whole migration now from their React code base to Preact, and they haven't talked about it a ton yet. They're right at the top there. They haven't talked about it a ton. There was like this tweet sort of about it, and then somewhere in here he mentions a GitHub README that they had written up. That right there. There we go.
This one?
Yeah, nice finding skills, man. Yeah, so if you go there, that walks through like sort of their thought process in terms of like all the things they considered about, what do we need to do when we're to be able to do the migration, what, the kind of the impacts were. It's actually a really nice walkthrough. But that's cool. I think we need more of that too. Like we need more like companies being like, we actually did the Preact thing and here's what we found out, because often it's not a very difficult transition.
Yeah, that's been my experience with Preact is like after you get over the initial hurdle, which is like you have to use Preact, you have to first learn what pragmas are, and then you have to understand that little bit of base context, and then it's really straightforward. But I do think that React has done a good job of convincing us that pragmas don't exist. And so when you then have to like ruin that illusion and realize that, there's magic happening with JSX and then dive back into it, you're like, that's a lot of work, but it's really not. If you're interested, you should absolutely try it. It is amazing. Preact is a fascinating tool. It's so good.
Yeah. So on the CSS thing, right? Like that was the other thing was we wanted to sort of verify that like there was no other blocking JavaScript. So if you could just click on like request 9 and then we'll look at 10 and 12 as well. But I think it's pretty safe that they're not. So there's this render blocking status at the very bottom. That's something that Chrome is just starting to ship in their DevTools protocol as of version 91. And 92 has a fix and 93 has a fix. So Chrome is actually starting to indicate like in the DevTools protocol whether or not a resource is blocking. So
that's
in
very
this case,
cool.
it's saying like upfront, this isn't blocking your rendering. And I suspect if you click on the next request or two as well, it looked like you were loading all of these in a non-blocking manner. Yeah, non-blocking. That's JSON, so it doesn't really apply.
Yeah,
non-blocking. Okay, so if we can get that CSS like down with that initial HTML, we're going to shift your first paint significantly earlier in the page load process here too.
Interesting.
Even if we don't remove the font preloads, we're going to see that benefit there.
Okay. Well, that's so. Yeah, I wish I knew how to do that really fast so we could just try it. But what I'll do is.
Yeah, I was going to say if it was 11D, I could do this for you pretty quick.
I know.
But I am not familiar with I'm sorry, Toast. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Toast. So I'm not.
I know enough.
To whip it up.
I know enough about it that I feel like we could get there, but I'm worried it would eat the rest of the episode. So I'm gonna. Here's what I will do. I will try this. I will open a pull request, and anybody who wants to, I'll publish the web page test of that PR, so that we can see the comparison. But yeah, I'll do a little follow up on it because I think this is really, really interesting stuff that I think would, especially like I think what you're recommending here is, okay, inlining CSS. All right, I need to add a step to my build where I'm going to find that CSS and just inject the contents of the file. Cool. I know how to do that. I can make that work. And the preloads, I'm just going to comment those out and see what happens, right? So it's a very, this doesn't feel like I'm doing huge lifting. A lot of times I worry that I'm like, oh no, I have to go in and like carefully tune my images or I need to like convert all my animated GIFs to MP4s. And it's like, oh, that's a lot of work for perf. But this feels tractable. Like it doesn't feel like I'm out here saying, well, crap, I got to set a whole sprint aside for perf.
Sure. And I think like that's the goal, I think, with perf. Like images are kind of the great perfect example of this, right? Like, yeah, if you're going to sit there and manually optimize images, which I'm not naming names, but some people on this video call do that because they're sick, twisted individuals who just enjoy that process. But like, you know, if you're going to manually sit there and like optimize it, it takes time, it takes energy. And like, you're going to forget to do it and stuff like that. And whereas like, if you can get, in your case, you're using Cloudinary is going to do all of that stuff for you.
Yes.
That smooths that away. That smooths that friction away. Same with like a good build process. Like I understand, you know, there's, you know, certainly I've experienced too build processes that I felt were a little bit overcomplicated for what was being engineered. But at the same time, a build process that is well put together can do things like immediately minify and inject that CSS without you ever having to touch it, right? Like,
you know what? I'm actually wondering now.
Is smoothed away.
I'm wondering if you can just like inline CSS. No, what's that? What is that? That was a weird thing that just happened. So yeah, there's a inline critical CSS. So I might be able to just install this plugin and it'll just work. I think I have to add
Yeah, you might be able to.
I think you have to add like a critical attribute to the CSS that you want to inline. But like this might be the sort of thing that I'm just, you know, because I'm on Netlify, I can click the button and then I'll add one attribute and hey, it's done. So I'll start here and see if I can make this work. But if you all want to give that a try, that could be an area to explore. But yeah, this is fascinating. So, okay, but I want to be mindful. We've got about, I think, 30 minutes left here. Okay. So I would love to take a look at what I think is a scourge of a lot of sites, third-party scripts. Right now, I have intentionally, because I am the only person who's a stakeholder on my site, I just don't have any. I use Sentry because I want the error reporting and you know, that's easy. But I don't have Google Ads. I don't have, what's the big one? Google Tag Manager. I don't use Segment or Full Story or any of the things that you'll see in a lot of production sites. I also don't have any like ads on the site. So what would be a good place to look if we wanted to get a sense of what does that look like? What's the impact that has? And maybe what are some of the strategies we can use to mitigate that without just saying, hey, no ads?
Well, let's try. I guess somebody just dropped android.com in the chat. Do they have that stuff running? I was going to say, like, I want to avoid the usual go-to for this is like CNN, but I always feel bad because like CNN they've had performance issues for so long. They kind of are the go-to poster child whenever people want to demonstrate how bad something is. And it's kind of mean. So like if we can,
you know what we could do is we could let's look really quick at my Twitter ads, because there's always one that's like a gossip mag, right? Okay. And those are just a wreck. So let's see how long before they show me one of these gossip ads. It shouldn't
take too long, right?
I know.
They're jacking those things all over the place there.
No, nothing. Today's the day that you're not going to show me anything,
That's
are you?
Disappointing.
Like, come on.
The one time you want Twitter to show you ads?
Where are you at? You know you want to tell me that there's like a cute relationship between Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively.
Oh, you've seen that one too.
Yes,
I get that one like every day.
They're pushing that one so hard.
I get that one a lot.
What, and today's the day your ad spend runs out? I'm so disappointed in Twitter. Like, come on, I know you're listening to me talk right now, Twitter. Where's my ad? Okay, fine. Maybe we can, what are those things called? Is it like Pop Sugar? Is that one of them?
Maybe. I don't know. Now this seems
like, yeah, this is going to be great. Let's do, how about this one?
Rock on.
Here is a post. Okay, so we've got Popover, we've got whatever that is. Here's some ads popping in. There's another ad popping in. Is this going to be one of those ones where the ad like jumps down the screen in the content? No, but this is good enough. There's tons and tons of stuff on here. So
there's a lot going on here.
Can you hear my computers? the fan just took off.
Yeah. All right, drop that in there. Let's make sure that's on the desktop version.
Okay, so I'm going to do this on Chrome.
Yeah.
All right. Same otherwise settings?
Yeah,
You can
we
do
can
it.
keep it at
Come on, little
4G.
pooper.
First repeat is good. Let's do that for now. We'll go back through in a second. We're going to run another test, I think, in a second to show off how you would see the impact a little bit. But this is good for the starting point just to see where we're at. Do-da.
All right. So this, I think, is going to be a much bigger chart. Like we're going to see a lot more happening. There's going to be.
Oh, yeah.
So while we're waiting for this to run, actually, maybe we can talk about like what is the we have this kind of tension between, you know, we want visibility into what's going on. We need, for a lot of these sites, especially, like ad revenue is the way that they function, and the way that they drive their content is based on engagement metrics. Thank you for the elevator music, chat. And thank you. I saw that Ben subscribed. Thank you. I saw earlier that other folks subscribed and I forgot who it was, and I'm really sorry, but thank you. Cassidy subscribed. That was right. But yeah, thank you all so much for subs. But okay. Third-party scripts enable us to do a lot. They're very important from a like product standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, for like business development, but they are hell on performance. So
Yes, they are.
what have you kind of found as like, do you have any just like general advice that you give to people for heuristics to think about third-party scripts with, or anything like that?
Yeah, so this goes back to, again, like why we do performance optimization in the first place, right? Like we're not just making it faster for the sake of making it faster. We're making it faster because two things. We expect it to provide a better user experience. And pragmatically speaking, as a company, we also expect that it's going to help, you know, business metrics, right? So that's easy when those two align really well. Ecom always feels like a good example, right? Like where if I optimize performance, I'm making the revenue off of those sales. Optimizing performance is going to lead to the better user experience, which is almost certainly going to lead to a higher conversion rate. Good for them, good for me. Where it gets interesting is starting to get in those third-party situations where through ads or through affiliate marketing or something, that's a big chunk of the company's revenue. Now, there is a little bit of tension, right? Because the fastest experience we have is gut all that stuff out of there. And it's going to be amazing from a user experience perspective. But the business is going to make no money and go bottom up. And then that's not the goal here, right? So like there is a tension there to some extent in a balance that we have to maintain. So the goal here, what I would always say is we need to be able to prioritize the stuff that is most important to the people visiting that site. So in the case of something like Pop Sugar, I need to make sure that the actual key story and image and text related to that comes up as early as possible, because if I delay that too long, nobody's going to stick around to see what ads I've got, right? It does not matter. So I need to be able to prioritize that and then get those ads up as quickly as possible, sort of to help the business side of things as well. So what I'm measuring there is I'm measuring a combination of user experience metrics around, you know, largest contentful paint, et cetera, as well as some business metrics that are around ad visibility. When do those things pop up? And then you're constantly looking to connect the dots between the two and find like, what is the balance? Like how far can I push in one direction without offsetting the other too much? Yeah. And there's no hard set answer, right? It's like a thing that you have to kind of experiment with and continue to keep an eye on as you're working on it.
For sure. Okay. Well, so we've got a real page test here of, again, we're looking at this site, which, you know, is one of the ones that's going to have all of the ads, and this one absolutely makes its money off of like ad revenue and affiliate sales, right?
Absolutely.
So looking at this test here, we can see it's got some yellow, it's got some red, we've got some issues. So if you were going to start diagnosing this, where would you start?
Okay. So first thing I'm looking at is the summary that you were just looking at, as well as the Chrome field data. Now that we've got a page that's popular enough, that Chrome field data is web page test going out to the Crux database for this page and comparing on a desktop run for this URL, you know, what's the P75? So I can see how it lines up to the test. So this test that we just ran actually shows a little bit slower first paint and largest contentful paint than what Chrome is experiencing at the 75th percentile. Okay. It's not obnoxiously slower, so I'm not too worried about it. But it is a little bit slower, just to kind of keep that in mind. But I think it's good enough that we can kind of run with this.
Okay.
What I'm usually more concerned about is the opposite. If I run web page test and it looks amazing, but Crux data shows me it's awful, then I've got a problem. In this case, I can deal with that. So then the next thing I'm doing is I'm looking at those metric summaries across the top. We know right away that largest contentful paint, CLS, and total blocking time need some work. But I'm also looking for gaps between these metrics. So first byte time, for example, is 837 milliseconds, which is probably not as fast as I'd like to see for a time to first byte. That's that. How long does it take for me to make that first request to get the first byte of something back from the server?
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't mind going right back up to the metric summary really quick, actually.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Getting ahead of myself here.
Yeah, no, you're excited. I like it. So there's gaps that jump out here, right? Like I've got a 1.5 second gap between when that first byte comes back from the server and when I start to show something on the page. That tells me I probably have some render blocking resources on the page, and there's a gap there that we could try to close. The other gap I'm seeing is between that start render and that largest contentful paint. We've got another 1.2 seconds there. Mm-hmm. In a dream world, an ideal world, your largest piece of content is one of the very first things to paint. And so that gap, we want that as tight as possible. In fact, we want them firing at the same time if we can. Mm-hmm. So those are other things I would look at, is that tells me the largest contentful paint, knowing this page is probably the image. There's probably something that delays that image coming out, or it's just down in the chain. So yeah, now if you click through to the actually, before you click through the waterfall, this is a good example, since largest contentful paint we know is an issue. Can you just click the largest contentful paint link in the metric summary?
Okay, here we go.
So this is the Web Vitals Diagnostics page that we're kind of working on in the open. So for the core Web Vitals, it'll zero in on some diagnostic information related to these. Okay. So in this case, yeah, we can see right away the largest contentful paint is that image. We get a little bit of information there to tell us exactly what the image is, how big it was, the source, all that stuff. And then right below that, we get a waterfall that's immediately truncated at the point that largest contentful paint fires. And the request is highlighted automatically for us.
That's really nice.
So we can see, so we see just, again, that zoomed in view. We see the image right away that's causing the problem. So, okay, a couple things then jump out here. Actually, Jason, you were already kind of on the right path with the other films, waterfall, and we kind of walked through a few things.
Okay.
I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were looking at this for, let's say that first contentful paint, we knew we had a delay between that start render and render blocking resources. Anything that jumps out?
Yeah, there's a couple things here. This one looks like it's blocking, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got a blocking JavaScript resource that's pushing everything else back here.
Yep.
And then it also looks like, let's see, what is that line?
That would be your first paint, your start render.
My first paint. So that leads me to believe then that this is also blocking. In body parser blocking. Okay.
Yeah.
And then is this one blocking? Yes. So basically we've got some kind of a dependency chain where we need to not only download this, but then we also need to download this. And it looks like this and this are on the same domain, which is not the top level domain.
Correct.
So we have to do this DNS negotiation here, so it's we load, so DNS and the whole negotiation, downloading HTML, parsing in HTML, then it gets displayed. Then we have to do all of the DNS negotiation again for the media1.popsugar assets. And then we have to download all of this JavaScript and execute it. And then it gets more stuff. And then we finally start downloading our images. So it looks like a lot of things could potentially be preloaded or pre-connected here.
Yeah, so you're right on the right path here for sure. We've got that secondary domain, nailed it. We have to open that connection to be able to grab the fonts, which are presumably being preloaded, which is why they're up front, as well as the CSS and the JavaScript. So that's delaying us a little bit. It takes time for those requests to occur. We've got the CSS we know is going to block render, but line in 9, you nailed, that's that JavaScript that's blocking render. And those little pink bars, if you zoom in, you'll see little pink marks on that waterfall. I don't know what visible that is to folks watching. that's JavaScript execution. So that's also hinting us that script arrives, and then we see some JavaScript execution right away after that.
Okay, so let me do a quick bit of clarification because I think I said this wrong. So then this pale yellow is download, and the dark yellow is parse?
Sorry, no. The dark, that actually, no. The pale yellow is the request has been made, and we're waiting for the server to send something back. The dark yellow is the content is being downloaded. We don't show parse in the waterfall view here. We'd show it in some of the JavaScript stuff. We only show execution. So, main thread execution.
Got it. But if it's a long parse time, then we can kind of see like, here's where we got the JavaScript and here's where it was executed.
Yep.
That gap is pretty obviously like something else was happening other than actually running the
browser
JavaScript.
Was busy with something delayed. Yeah. So you're right. So so we've got line 8, 9, 10. 10 is another domain entirely. Probably 11 and 12 are blocking. If they're not blocking, they're just oddly prioritized. If you click on one of those,
in-body parser
blocking. Okay. Yeah. Which means that it's blocking, like it's in the body of the page, but it's blocking the parser below it. So those are all blocking. And then it looks like you're right. Line 13 there, that request, if you click on it, can we see if the initiator loaded by, it says it's loaded by the doc, but maybe it's not queued up until
3021. So, you know what I bet it is? It's the in-body parser blocking, right? So if it can't get further down the document, this is 3,000 lines down the HTML.
Yeah, which is probably a BC HTML file to begin with, Yeah,
well, and we can probably look at this. Let's see how big it is. It's
not that bad. 32 is not as bad as I would have thought. Okay.
Yeah.
But there are a couple that do look like big resources on this page. They close that off. The image itself, look at how much of that is dark shaded on the line 16 request. So if you click on that, that's a 300K image right there that's triggering the largest contentful paint. So even first off, we want to shift that over by getting rid of some of these render blocking stuff and things like that. But the other thing is, with that 300K, almost guaranteed, if we ran that through some sort of an optimization process, we would have that much lower.
I mean, let's honestly, we can just do this, right? Let's copy it and then let's go to Squoosh. So this is a really cool tool that will let you do a quick comparison. So, so let me reload and then I'm going to paste. Okay. So here's our image, and looking at this image, we can then compress it. And so we were able to bring it down. I guess this was showing us the original at 4.46 megabytes. But if I take the quality down to 50, this is going to be 151. And then if I zoom in, we can even see, let's maybe look at her face. This is the parsed image, and this is the original. So it's you can start to see artifacts, but it's not that big of a deal, right? This is pretty acceptable, and we just made this thing 97% smaller. So especially for big images, I use this tool all the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then if you go back to, Squish is great.
Drop a link for that. Okay, so back to here.
Yeah, the other thing I'm wondering about that file itself. Can you click on that file again, on that request again?
Yeah.
Line 16. And click on the object tab.
Okay. I wonder if it loads a full-size one later on at some point. It looks like
I'm wondering if it itself is a full-size, if it's just oversized. Close that actually once. Or just open the image in a new tab, it'd be fine.
Okay, open image in new tab. Here, and it's a pretty big image.
It's big.
Yeah.
So that's larger than it needs to be. If you go back to the web page test run, actually, and then scroll all the way up, almost all the way up, maybe. There, a little bit more. Little more. Stop. There. If you click, can you do a command click or a control click on the image analysis tab? All right, let's look at that. That's Cloudinary is going to actually grab all the images on this page and either apply optimizations and see what they think the size could be down. Critically, if you optimize the image in terms of compression, but also if you sized it more appropriately.
Oh, this is such a cool. So basically what this is doing, if I'm understanding correctly, is so we're going to go through, it's going to look at this site and it's going to say, all right, here's an image, grab that. Here's an image, grab that. And for each of those, it'll figure out what its size is on the page and then resize and optimize properly.
Yes.
What an amazing, okay, that's a great idea.
So yeah, if you go back to that and scroll down, now I think they're loading it up on like a mobile version when they test it, to keep that in mind. But look at the size difference here, for the actual hero image. It is being served at like 2048 wide, right?
Right.
Is what they're saying, and bringing that down to like 728. They're showing you below there, like at the most, even if you go with the ping format, it's still less than 60%.
Right. And so we could drop this thing down by 80% if we served WebP. Or and if you've got if you're using Cloudinary, the thing that they do that's cool is they'll do what's called content negotiation, where they check what your browser can support and then send the right format. So you can do like format auto. So if your browser supports AVIF, they'll send down AVIF, you get 42 kilobytes of image. Otherwise, they'll send down WebP. Otherwise, they'll send down JPEG, and it just kind of goes down the chain until you hit something that you can support. But this is incredible. Yeah, like look, we could go down to see an 85% drop here, an 80% drop here, 88% drop. Like you could save so much weight on this page.
Right. And so some of that is ads, which maybe they don't have as much control over, but like certainly for any of their own images, like that's going to be a huge part of that experience, and bringing those down will absolutely help tremendously. Yeah,
that would be a huge improvement. And again, this is the sort of thing that like you can automate this. So I'll show you how I do it right on this page. I actually use for each of these, I use the Cloudinary fetch thing. And so you can go in and look at these, and basically what I'm doing is, where's the image? It's in here somewhere. There's the image. So if we look at this URL, it like grabs the fetch endpoint and then it applies these transformations, but then it just gets the URL. So I'm literally saying, take literally whatever image I give you, and then resize it to be, 500 pixels by 250 pixels. Fill the image when you crop it. Focus on a face if there's a face. Use the automatic quality, automatic format. So all of this is done, basically right out of the gate based on this original image. So like this is the original image, and then Cloudinary automatically gives me that. It's amazing how powerful that is. Yep. And all I had to do was edit my image tags to use that fetch format to it's exactly what you're doing in your blog post.
Exactly. Yeah. It's awesome. It's like you literally set it one time and then forget all about it. Like set it and forget it to a T.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, I guess like if you take one thing away, go fix your images.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't do we have a few minutes yet?
We have about 3 minutes before I need to take us home. Oh man.
Okay. So if you scroll down again, I know we were talking about third-party stuff here specifically.
Yeah.
So 2 things that I would note right away. When you have third parties that are also blocking, like render blocking, like, so for example, that script.fixel.ai.
Yes.
Looks like that is something that might be blocking, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one is,
yeah, in-body parser blocking, or even just loading jQuery from the googleapis.com thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that other third-party domain sitting in your rendering path like that, you inherit any of their performance problems. So if their server is slow to respond, if it's hanging, they're having a bad day, whatever it happens to be, your page display is going to be delayed at least as long as their server is. It's called a single point of failure. Like you've created like this point where like if their thing goes down, yours goes down. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's like if you're going to load third parties, which you have to, that's fine. You need to try and defer and async those as much as possible. Get them out of that render, like that critical path, because otherwise they're going to create this weakness, this vulnerability in the page load process for you, which is not great.
Oh my goodness, they're all blocking. I was trying to see if any of them were like deferred or anything. But so the way that you would do this, like if it was you, would you set these with like script tag, but then just add the async attribute, or would you defer? Or, I mean, I know it depends, but
it depends. So async or defer. Async is going to say, download the JavaScript, continue parsing the HTML while you're downloading it, but as soon as you've got the file, execute it, which means it could still potentially block the page. Actually, most of the potentially blockings you see, that's what that is.
Okay.
If the page hasn't displayed by the time the script arrives, it will block display of the page. Defer is sort of the nuclear option that says download it, but do not execute until after the rest of it is done. Like I've got stuff displayed on the page. So if it is a script that so ads are actually a pretty good candidate for defer if you can get that initial render out fast enough, that initial display of the page out fast enough that it's not pushing your ads so late that you're not going to get any revenue off of it.
Right.
So defer would be the ideal candidate. Async is sort of the fallback on that. And we don't have time to run the test because it takes a while to run. But one thing you can do to sort of demonstrate impact on these third parties as well is if you go to the webpagetest.org homepage, there is a type of test tab called or I guess it's under event. If you scroll down and go to the SPOF tab.
SPOF.
Yeah. So if you were to drop like one of those third-party providers' host names here and then hit enter, what would happen is it would run the test. It would proxy that request to blackhole.webpagetest.org, which is a page or a site that just does not respond. It hangs. So it'll run a test of your normal page and then a page if that third party is down and show you the film strips. And so you can see the actual difference in the risk that you're taking on with those third parties.
So that means to just repeat this back to you to make sure I understand it. What you're saying is this will show what happens if you're looking at Pop Sugar, but Fixel is down.
Exactly.
And in this case, if Fixel is down, you have to wait for that request to Fixel to time out before anything else happens on the screen, right?
Correct.
Oof. Yeah, that's rough because the timeout is long, right? It's like over a minute. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's long. Which is why we can't wait for the test because it's going to take a while to do that. That's one thing that you can do to sort of demonstrate the risk. And then to demonstrate the impact, if you go back to that page again, to the home page, again, if you go to the block tab there, here you can actually block requests or domains. So this doesn't make them hang. This excludes them from the test and pretends like the browser pretends those don't exist. So you can actually run a test of the page without some of those third-party providers and then compare the performance results. Like, how bad is it actually hurting us that we're using a third-party provider here or there? So
what this tool gives you is, when you have, like, a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people around the company, the struggle is that I'm talking about one goal and they're talking about another goal, and they're ultimately the same goal, but we don't have any shared language to communicate what we're trying to get at.
Sure.
What this does is it gives me shared language, because what I'm able to do is I'm able to say, our site is not loading fast enough. And they say, we need ad revenue. And then I can say, look, if I run the site, here's a performance test without any of the third-party scripts, and here's a performance test with them. Do you see that this is, 10 times slower? We're not getting ad revenue because people are waiting so long. We need to find the medium ground, and that makes it tangible. It's not like arbitrary perf. It's, look, I can literally show you that the site is 10 times faster if we take these scripts out. So we need to start making some trade-offs.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, and since it's all on like hardware versus like on dev tools on your own machine, it's reproducible. So again, like, I guess we didn't do the DevTools thing. I love DevTools. I use DevTools all the time. You can do a lot of the same stuff here. But then if I'm going to share that result with the rest of the team, I'll hop into here first, because here I know if they run a test, they're going to see mostly the same thing.
And I can, I share this, right? Anybody who wants to see it can go look at this test that we just did. Okay, perfect. So unfortunately, that means we are out of time. So let me swing it on back to the homepage here, and we're going to just do a quick shout out. We've had Rachel with us all day doing live captioning. Thank you so much, Rachel. She's from White Coat Captioning. And that's made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, Fauna, Auth0, and Hasura all kicking in to make the show more accessible. Tim, other than Twitter, which I'm going to drop in the chat right now, where else should people go if they want to either learn more from you and or follow up and do more with their web perf?
Sure. So my site, which is linked from the Twitter bio there, although the other one, I guess, maybe even better nowadays is blog.webpagetest.org. I think I've blogged for my own site maybe twice in this year, and I think I've written like 8 or so for the webpage test blog. I'm not very good at writing for myself when I start writing for other things.
I have similar problems.
Yeah. So this is a good one for both, like a mix of like, we try to do the product updates like you see up top, but if you go down, there's also like more technical posts where like we'll walk through like, how do you do this in web page test, or, you know, actually like the benchmarking or studies and stuff like that. So it's a nice mix of content, and it's not just me. So
yeah,
you know, Gina's is really good, that kind of thing. So yeah, this would be the other place to keep in mind.
That is fantastic. Tim, thank you so much. Chat, thank you as always for hanging out. Make sure you head over to the site and check out the schedule. We've got so much good stuff coming up. Later this week, we're bringing on John Breen. We're going to learn how to do a command line interface in Rust. I cannot wait for that. Then I'm taking a week off. I'm going to a cabin. I'm doing nothing. But when I get back, we're going to be talking to Daniel Peary about Strappy. We're going to be talking to Tamaj Lakami about serverless functions and TypeScript. I can't wait. So many good things are coming. I cannot wait. Y'all need to get on this schedule. Make sure you click on that Google Calendar link so that you have them listed for you so you never miss one. With that, Tim, thank you again so much. Chat, stay tuned. We're going to go find somebody to raid. Thanks, y'all. We will see you next time.
Thanks.